this on? Are we on now?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you so much. Well, welcome to our conference on 2012 politics and the history of presidential elections in Virginia. We hope you enjoyed our former presidents. If you were here this morning, were they terrific? Give them a great round of applause. I just ran into President Zachary Taylor, and he insisted to me that he had been poisoned. And he demanded that we find out who did it. And he said that when they exhumed him, you know, they did that a few years back. I don't remember who did it, but they exhumed him. John, how are you? They are former Lieutenant Governor John Hager. When they exhumed him, they only checked for arsenic. It turned out there were more popular poisons in that day. Who knew? Who knew? Actually, in Charlottesville, we're finding out about poisons. I almost didn't get here. The people with the pitchforks didn't let me out of town, but I finally bought my way out. We've had a palace coup, and we're in the midst now of a counter coup, and we're just trying to keep the big boys honest. Nonetheless, we won't talk about that, and we hope that this embarrassment will soon be over, but thank goodness we're in Richmond. And as I got to knock this off, but as I've recently learned, I may not have a job when I get back. Thank God for tenure. Now, what we're going to do in our first panel and our second panel is talk about the presidential election and the congressional elections and also Virginians in the White House. I'm really looking forward to that. And I saw my dear friend Jack Marsh back there. Wave at him, Jack. Chief of Staff, Counselor to President Ford, and of course former 7th District Congressman. And he has forgotten more about politics than any of us here know. And we are thrilled to have him. But we'll get to that later. That's the second panel. I want to take a moment here to introduce the first panel before I start peppering them with really, really tough questions. And let me start, and I'm just going to be really brief. I think you've got I hope you've got their longer bios. Did they pass out the longer bios? Well, then I guess I'll have to go through the longer bios. I'd hope to avoid that, because a lot of them are lies. You know, I don't even believe a lot of the things they've submitted here. I really don't. Will the panel permit me to be relatively brief? Because we've got long bios, and you all are outstanding, and I could take an hour on each one of you. Christina Bellantoni is politics editor for the PBS NewsHour, where she directs coverage of the campaigns in the White House and congressional news, and of course appears on the program for on-air analysis. And she's got a long resume, but let's leave it at that. Hope you're not mad at me, Christina. If you are, I can't help it. Join the club. Get in line. Former Congressman Tom Davis serves as Director of the Federal Government Affairs for Deloitte & Touche and is the President and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership, an organization which advocates for conservative fiscal policy in Washington, though he's a social moderate. Don't let him fool you. And I know the truth. I know the truth. He mixes it up, but again, the guy knows the details of politics and baseball better than anybody in the room. I mean, don't ever get into an argument, or for God's sakes, don't ever appear on Jeopardy with him. I can tell you that much, because you'll lose. A dear friend, Jill Lawrence, who has gotten a wonderful job as National Journal's managing editor for politics, and of course for many, many years was with USA Today and Associated Press and all the rest. And Jill, we're delighted to have you back and wish you well with that new job. J. Mart, Jonathan Mart. Who else is known in that fashion? J. Mart. J. Mart is senior reporter for Politico, and I do mean senior reporter. I mean, he's everywhere. He does everything. He knows everything. He covers national politics. But what you really need to know is that he's just returned from his honeymoon, and he is now a member of one of Washington's most important power couples, his wife, Betsy Fisher Martin. She's actually added your name. She doesn't know you that well, does she? She added that name, and she's the executive producer for Meet the Press. So, I mean, this is one half of one of the big power couples. And they went to Rome on the Isle of Capri for their honeymoon. And I just think it's terrific. Give him a round of applause, really. Now, next we have Juan Williams. No, I'm sorry. That is definitely not Juan Williams. Lauren Whittington was nice enough to step up to the plate. Juan, unfortunately, had to cancel. It was unavoidable, and I understand completely. He's participated in many of our conferences, and so I gave him a pass. But Lauren was nice enough to step up to the plate because she fits here. She's a native of Amelia County. But more to the point, well, sure, they love Amelia County. She is a journalist with Congressional Quarterly and Roll Call, and has served as politics editor there since 2009. And believe me, if you don't read Roll Call and you love politics, well, you need to find out about Roll Call, because you absolutely have to keep up with it to keep up with politics. Well, team, we're happy to be here. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk a lot about what's happening. And let me just start off with a question about what's happening in the presidential race, because I think we're all watching something pretty incredible occur. The president, I think, started out the year being well ahead. Most of the conventional wisdom was that he would have an easy race for re-election, the way most incumbents do in American history. About 2/3 of them have won re-election, half of them by landslide margins, half of them by narrow margins, but 2/3 have won re-election. And the assumption was, well, bad economy for 4 years and it would bounce back just in time. And sure enough, the economy seemed to be bouncing back, and then splat. We're right back in the soup economically. President Obama is tied with Mitt Romney in virtually every survey, shocking just about everybody who thought the Republicans would continue splitting, who thought that Mitt Romney couldn't raise the kind of money President Obama can. And now we hear, I think it was in Politico, Jonathan, that in fact the Republicans, counting the super PACs, will be outspending President Obama in the election. Who could have imagined that? So what in the heck happened? And that's my first question for you. And of course, what's going to happen? Christina, would you like to start us off?
Why not? Thanks so much for having me, Larry. I appreciate it. And I'm really proud to be on such an esteemed panel of journalists and former congressmen here. So what happened? Well, a lot of different things, and I don't want to hog the spotlight because I imagine some of us are going to say similar comments, but a big part of what's important about what's shaping how this presidential race will be decided on November 6th is the economy. And many years it has been proven that people start to form their opinions about how the economy is going right about now before November election. And that's where you're really seeing some pretty big indicators in some of these important swing states where unemployment is lower than the national average. Obviously here in Virginia, that's an issue you hear your governor talking about a lot. So that is affecting things. But what's also important to keep in mind is that we're all political junkies in this room, and we're paying fairly close attention. If you're here listening to former presidents, you probably know a little bit about this presidential race. But most of the country is not paying attention yet. Traditionally, that starts to happen after Labor Day. These candidates are going to refine and hone their messages and have a lot of changes thrown at them over the next few months. So that's when people are really going to tune in. And more than likely, President Obama and Mitt Romney are going to keep exchanging leads in this race. You're going to see some states where the president maintains a lead. The president seems pretty confident in the West. But I think places here like Virginia, obviously the big battlegrounds like Ohio and Florida, you're going to see it go back and forth and be fairly close until the very end.
Excellent. Thank you, Christina. That was about the right length so we can get everybody in for all these questions and then get questions from the floor. Congressman Davis.
Well, Larry, let me just say 4 years ago, you had President Bush in the White House with approval in the 20s. You had two unpopular wars. You had the president with about a 2-to-1 spending advantage. It was 3-to-1 in Virginia because he didn't take the match and McCain did. And with all that against him, then the economy collapses in mid-September. It created an atmospherics where the president gets 53% of the vote. Fast forward 4 years, where are we today? The metrics are not good for the administration. the public are not policy wonks. As V.O. Key said, if the shoe pinches, they know, and the shoe is pinching with unemployment at 8%. We've not had a president reelected with unemployment over 7.2% since Roosevelt. And both Carter and Bush, it was 7.5%, 7.6%. So the metrics are not good for the administration, and that is what has happened, is outcomes matter, and right now they're not getting a good outcome.
Let me just, one quick follow-up. How could, obviously, things continue to move the way they're moving. I think anybody in the room could guess which way the election's going to go. Does it take simply an upturn in the economy, in your view, Tom, or is there actually something the Obama people could do to change the atmospherics?
Well, look, I think when they did the original stimulus, they made a huge mistake. They didn't go enough into the public works side. They tried to sprinkle it and try to do some other policy angles as well that didn't seem to work. You know, you could get a transportation bill, but with 4.5 months, I think he's dependent on Europe and things that he can't control at this point. So what they're trying to do is destroy Romney, say, well, we may be bad, but he's worse. That was my reelection campaign one year. We're terrible, but they're worse.
And it worked. You got reelected.
It worked for me. It didn't work for George Allen, but it was. So it can work. There are people who, but Romney is a tough guy to take down. He may give a fireside chat and the fire goes out, but at the end of the day, he doesn't have many flies on him, and he's so I think it's going to be tough for him.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Jill.
Well, you asked what happened, that the president suddenly lost his lead. What happened was the Republican primaries ended, and Mitt Romney stopped getting beaten up on every second of every day. So I don't think this is ever going to be easy for the president. So now we're seeing kind of the race settle into where it would be. It reminds me of 2004 when the Iraq War was raging. I mean, that was kind of an even race for a long time, and I think this one will be too. And in terms of what the president can do about it, I mean, the president has powers like the ones he used on this immigration order, which is, I think, going to be very helpful. You know, he can capture attention, and he can reinforce his constituencies' needs and wishes. So that's one thing he can do. And the other thing is that I don't know if you saw a story in the Washington Post today about Romney's Bain career involving outsourcing. You know, these are the types of things that feed into the story that the Obama campaign is trying to tell.
Jill, tell them what it was, because they've all been here. They haven't read the Post. They've been living politics today.
It was a deep dig into Romney's time at Bain, and the company invested in a lot of companies that kind of pioneered putting call centers overseas and outsourcing or offshoring some jobs. And you know, this is just not the kind of thing that's going to play well in some of the places that Mitt Romney is really hoping to win, like Ohio and Michigan. So, you know, these are not things the Obama campaign controls, but it will certainly use them when they come up.
Excellent. J. Mark.
Larry, first let me say thanks for having me here. It's a thrill to be on the panel. I've come to this event for years, and you do great work at the center, and so thank you for all that you do. Thanks for having me here.
It's all my staff. In fact, I want my staff to, I should have done this in the beginning, raise your hands or stand. Jeff is standing. Wherever they are, they do a fantastic job.
Larry, I think Larry,
yes.
Get some more time with that response. I think he keep it up.
No, he's finished. That was the response. No, I'm sorry, J. Mark.
Small bills, Larry.
Yes,
small bills.
okay.
Look, I think, to be fair here, the folks in Chicago with the Obama campaign have said for some time now that Mitt Romney was going to have his moment, and he's having that moment right now. There was never going to be a campaign that just, you know, bumped along and Obama was going to win, and it was never going to be close. That's just not how modern politics in this evenly divided country, what Michael Brown calls open field politics, that's just not how it works anymore. So Romney was going to have his moment. He's having it right now, and the question is it going to last? And look, I think this thing is bound to tighten back up again because of what Christina said, and that is, if you look at the map, it tends to favor President Obama. And look, if Europe melts down and the economy really swings against the president, then that map could really look different, and Romney could be playing in places like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. But right now, if you look at the map, the president has got some leeway, and the president can lose some states and still get 270 votes. And we can dive further into that as we go on. But it's just, if you look right now, all things being equal, the onus is more on Governor Romney to put states in play than it is on President Obama.
Good, excellent. Lauren.
Can I just second everything that my esteemed
Sure.
colleagues
That's
said?
that is really the safest position to take on any panel. Agree with everything that's been said.
I'll just follow a little bit on, what Jonathan said. This remains it was never going to be an easy reelection, for Obama. And this remains a very deeply divided country. And I think that, that's kind of overlooked somewhat because we've had 3 successive wave elections that have gone, one way or the other, obviously, and control of Congress has changed twice. In 3 of them, and because Obama's 2008 campaign, he won by a very comfortable margin because things fell out for John McCain there at the end. He's not going to win Virginia by, did he win by 7 points? Is that right?
Approximately.
He's not going to win Virginia by 7 points. He's not going to win Virginia by 5 points. And I'm sure the other guests here will give you what their guess is. The country remains deeply divided, and that's why I think we have a toss-up race.
All right, this was a great introduction by you 5. Now we're gonna get in the Electoral College in a moment, but first I want to do something historical because some of our former presidents are still around. They don't. This doesn't go as far back as they do, but 3 presidential elections. All right, is this one going to resemble 2004 when President George W. Bush was relatively unpopular because of Iraq? At this time in 2004, he was 9 points behind John Kerry. Isn't it amazing what people forget? They always assume that the winner was always ahead. No, President Bush was 9 points behind John Kerry in the Gallup poll at this particular point. And he poured it on. He did what Tom said. He neutralized, on the one hand, then on the other hand, John Kerry. I voted for it before I voted against it and all the rest. Is it going to be like that in reverse, in the sense that the incumbent, this time's a Democrat instead of a Republican? Or is it going to be like 1992 when you had an incumbent president who was presiding over a recession or recessionary times? The recession had ended actually well before the election, just like now, but he couldn't sell that prosperity was returning, George H.W. Bush, and he lost to an insurgent from the other party who promised better times. It's the economy stupid Bill Clinton. Or is it going to surprise us and be another 1980? And in the end, if things haven't improved and people are losing hope, and on the Friday before the Tuesday election, when the final jobs report comes out and we find we're stuck at 8.2 or wherever it is, people, as they did with Jimmy Carter and the collapse of the Iranian hostage negotiations on the Sunday before the Tuesday election, throw up their hands and say, I can't take it anymore. And Carter went from being 2 points behind Reagan on Sunday to being 10 points behind Reagan on Election Day. Is it going to be 2004, 1992, or 1980? And I don't want to hear any equivocations. Now, who wants to start? I don't want to. Look, okay. Well, there, Tom took it. I'm sorry.
It's got elements of all of them.
Oh. Can you see why he won all those years?
I'm coming down firm. The difference from '92 is you had Perot, and you had that third party in there that took some votes. Actually, hurt both candidates. '80. You had Reagan, who started off radioactive and was able to make the sale at the end. It was basically a referendum on Carter, and you had a bad economy. You have those elements. But this really resembles 2004 because the alignments, unlike 80 and 92, are now very cultural in terms of their underpinnings at the Electoral College. And I don't think they're going to budge a lot. We're talking about within the 40-yard lines. And this could be a lot of mobilization at the end in terms of turning out our base. That's what 2004. Everybody turned out who they could. One thing that the president has is, if the economy doesn't improve, is I think it gives Romney a slight edge in that, and it hurts his ability to mobilize elements of the coalition that the president was able to do. But I think it's going to most resemble 2004 just because of the cultural alignments, and it looks like they're working toward mobilization as opposed to going after independence.
So a 51-48 one for other independents.
I think it'll be in that, and I think we know what states are in play. This is not a...
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. Okay, Jill.
Well, I voted for 2004 in the last round, I just wanted to point out, and I stick with that for a lot of reasons. One is that the incumbent is the better politician with more charisma and better campaign skills, and the challenger is vulnerable to what the incumbents were both doing, George W. Bush to Kerry and now Obama to Romney, just hitting on them and disqualifying them or trying to disqualify them as an alternative, not trustworthy or not in touch, that sort of thing. And you had in '92, Clinton was the one with the political skills, so that helped him, and George H.W. Bush was the one who seemed out of touch. And the same in 1980, Reagan was the one with the charisma and just, the dynamism, and Carter was nowhere.
I hate to be an echo here, so let me just slightly modify what my two colleagues here have said. I think it does resemble '04 more because of what Tom said, which is the fact that the country is not like it was in '64 or '72 or '80, where you could have these large blocks of voters swing to one party or the other. The fact is, we're now in a sort of political stasis where certain demographics support the certain parties, and that just doesn't change regardless of the atmospherics. So I think the days of Reagan winning 49 states against Mondale is just past. That said, I do think if the economy does really turn south, if, like I mentioned earlier, if the European crisis, the contagion crosses the Atlantic, I do think you could see a sort of modified version of '92 in the sense of, forget Perot for a second, but just the idea that the Bush folks so desperately wanted to hang Arkansas around Clinton's neck. And, this backwater state, what did Bush say about Arkansas? There was a great line about Bush about Arkansas where he, sort of mocking this backwater state. And eventually, folks just tuned it out. They just didn't want to hear it because
next to Mississippi.
Yeah, exactly. Because they were so right. If it wasn't for Mississippi, Arkansas would be. But folks eventually just tuned it out because they were so focused on their own pocketbook, and it just bounced off eventually. And Clinton going to Moscow as a college student, and Arkansas being 49th in every category. People eventually they just didn't care because the economy was in such a bad place that they wanted change. And so I think there's a possibility of that if you do see Europe really do melt down.
I'm just going to throw in one thing. You are always on target there. And when I saw that first Obama ad about Massachusetts, 47th in this, 50th in that, blah, blah, the first thing I did, I went to that presidential commercials history website to review what the George H.W. Bush people had run against Clinton. It's just almost the same thing. That Arkansas was 50th in this and 47th in that, and my God, isn't it awful? Couldn't we get rid of them out of the Union and so on and so forth? And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I don't know why. I'm shocked that Chicago doesn't know that.
It has the possibility of working in a close race. And my point is that defining him on Bain and defining him as being a poor governor could give him a sort of edge like Bush did against Kerry, presuming it's a close race. My point is that if the economy really goes to a bad place, that those kinds of attacks could be sort of moot.
Christina, Lauren, what do you think?
Well, 2004 seems to be the right answer here.
You're working out beautifully for this panel, really.
I'll agree with that and just make 2 points. One, the big difference from now in 2004 is the Iraq War was front and center in that campaign. And, President Bush's reelection was based around, started the job, who do you trust, to finish it. Obviously now we have a president who can say, we got Osama bin Laden. I think, the economy, which is what we all agree, is going to be front and center here, but I think we'll be talking some that, foreign affairs are still important. And then two, the 2004 campaign really was kind of a turning point in and it seems so long ago, the personal attacks in politics. I mean, this was the year of the Swift boat. And the Swift boat attacks, and it seems kind of so long ago because of what we've seen transpire since then. And I think if the Swift boat, similar attacks were to happen, in this election cycle, I don't think we would be that, we wouldn't be that.
Chris LaCivita will be happy to hear that. He's in and out of this Capitol a lot. Christina?
Well, just for the sake of being contrarian, this is what I was going to answer even before I heard everybody else, but I'm going to say option D and the year 2000. I think it's going to be a very close election. I think turnout will be low. And what the president is seeing happen is he got a lot of people that really had no business voting for a Democrat or voting for someone like him in 2008 because there was a lot of excitement around his election, and he brought along people to have this giant win. A lot of those people have changed their minds. They don't like what he's done as president, and so he's going to lose that sort of new coalition that came along. So what he needs to do is he needs to get out his people. And when you think about how many people that is, it's half. And Romney's got maybe about half, and maybe he's going to capture the people that aren't excited about Obama anymore. And then what happens? I don't think we're going to see another Florida, but I think it's going to be incredibly close, and that's why this is being fought out on the margins.
Oh, God, I'm thrilled. 2000 was the best year ever for the political analysis business. I mean, it went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. The money kept flowing in. I sold books. Oh, God, thank you, Christina. I know what I'll be dreaming about tonight. All right, 537 votes in Virginia, maybe. Wouldn't that be great? Because, we have such a terrific system here, and I know that we can do a better job. We don't have butterfly ballots. I will be able to get through that after a 2-month overtime period. Okay. Now, Electoral College. All right, let's talk about the Electoral College. Let's get down to brass tacks, because it's not about the popular vote, and it's not about the Gallup polls, and they only measure, unless they focus on the swing states, they only measure the overall popular vote totals. And people forget George W. Bush lost the popular vote by 1/2 of 1%. It was 540,000 votes. It was a lot of votes, and that can happen. Proportionally, it was even worse in 1876 when the Democrat lost to Rutherford B. Hayes by 250. He won the popular vote 250,000 votes at a time when the electorate was very small. It was enormous. So it can happen under the Electoral College system. So we have to focus on the states. And look, everybody knows out west, it's Colorado and Nevada. In the Midwest, it's Ohio and Iowa. In the Northeast, just little New Hampshire. The Middle Atlantic, Virginia, and the South, Florida. But I want to see if there are any you want to add to those Super 7 swing states. Are there any you think should be added? Who wants to add one?
I'll add a couple. I think you start with the 2004 as a better indication than 2008. 2008, Obama just so overperformed for the atmospherics that I talked about earlier. But I think that Pennsylvania is clearly going to be in play for a number of reasons, which we can discuss in detail if you want to get into.
Give us one.
And Wisconsin,
give us one for Wisconsin, for Pennsylvania.
You take a look at how Western Pennsylvania and that area from Oklahoma up through Western Pennsylvania has been trending demographically and how it has been voting. That's one area. Obama actually went down in 2008 from Kerry. And then you take a look at the Philadelphia suburbs at this point. When you start going after wealthy people in the rich, I think that tamps that down. And then the student vote, I think, is going to be way down for them this year. That's one part of their coalition that's not coming. The students are no longer in college. They're living in their parents' basements looking for jobs.
Was that partisan? You know this is a nonpartisan panel.
It is, but it's a fact. I mean, I read it in the Post.
You read it in the Post. All right. Jill. Jill.
Quickly run through your list again.
All right, Nevada, Colorado out west, Iowa.
Davis, Larry. It's just hard following Tom Davis here. He's such great shtick that it's just hard for us following him.
I'm sorry. All right, no, it's
like following Marco Rubio or something there.
All right, Nevada, Colorado, Iowa, Ohio, New Hampshire, Virginia, Florida. Those are the 7, but we just added Pennsylvania. And that is, we're going to hold Tom Davis to that in November. If he's wrong, everyone write him.
Okay, I don't think I heard you say North Carolina.
I didn't.
But I think I'd put that on the list because Obama is closer to Romney in polls of North Carolina than Romney is to Obama in polls of Pennsylvania. So I think there's still some room to move, particularly because the immigrant populations are growing in places like that. So that's what I'd add.
How many, just quickly, again, one quick follow-up on this panel. I want to see how many of you think Romney will end up carrying North Carolina? How many of you think Obama will end up carrying North Carolina? You don't, and the others undecided.
I don't know. I'm undecided.
Yeah.
Let's have a revote. I think she's.
I thought you first said Obama. Romney will carry North Carolina.
Right, I'm with you.
If he does,
It's over.
It won't matter because they'll lose a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. And look, you can argue that's what the Obama people are arguing too, and maybe they're right. You know, I just don't see it. I think, you know, that close one is already tipped over.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm thinking that, you know, there's a couple more months to see which way the economy goes and whether Europe gets its act together. So I think we'll know a lot more.
Have you ever lived in Europe? There's no chance that Europe will get its act together before November. I can guarantee you that. Sorry about that. I mean, J-Mar just went to Italy. You know, let's get real.
It's helping their economy.
Yeah, it takes a century to get Italy together. Yeah, no, I know that. Well, thanks to you, you spent a fortune. Okay, what other states? Christina?
Have we had Michigan yet?
No, well, I would add Wisconsin. I know you sort of briefly mentioned it, but
Wisconsin.
but I'll just say, I'll let Lauren talk about Wisconsin. But on North Carolina, it was a very, very close race. The Romney people are very confident there, and you know, conventions, it doesn't really matter where they're held, and you're gonna, you know, people in Charlotte are gonna be irritated about the traffic and the security shutdown. But what's fascinating about what they're doing in North Carolina is they are really working to turn out that base. When you look at all of the different visits that they've had there, the constituencies that they're talking to there, they are counting on more of their people living in that state on November 6th. I think they can win it.
Yeah, there's just such a margin of error for the president in North Carolina because if you look at 2008, with everything going right, how narrowly he carried the state. And
14,000 votes, right?
Right.
Yeah.
14,000.
And if you just take the Raleigh Triangle by itself, and there are so many moderates who live there, who are transient, who move from other states, who aren't ideological at all, who, you know, like then Senator Obama in 08, were tired of Bush, didn't like McCain, were concerned about Palin. You guys know the whole litany. They gave President Obama a chance. I think there are enough of those kind of voters there who are going to have pause before voting for President Obama again. Have we mentioned Michigan yet?
We have not. Been waiting for that.
I think Michigan is one of those states that could be in play. If Romney keeps running a strong race, and if you know, we're talking about a competitive contest, I think in October Michigan could potentially be in play. If you look at the polling right now, look at the three counties, Wayne, Macomb, and Oakland, which are the three counties in and around Detroit. It's where the population center of the state is. Romney's performing pretty well right now. The polls there, if that holds to fine outstate, I think he could be in the game. The dagger for him there is the fact that he voted against or not voted against, but he spoke out against the auto bailout, and the Obama folks will hang that around his neck. But again, he grew up there. He is acceptable in those kind of upscale suburbs where Republicans have really struggled in recent years, in part because of his own, you know, parents and legacy there. And if we're talking about a close race, I think he'll be in the game there. It's going to be really interesting, though, as you guys know, because this is a smart crowd. Forget what we say, forget what the candidates say. Watch what they're doing on TV. If these candidates are advertising in a place as expensive as Detroit in October, then we're going to know that they're serious about playing there, right? I mean, watch their feet.
I just didn't like that advice about ignore us. You know, I thought that was very foolish of you, J. Mart. Very foolish. What about the Obama campaign's claim that Arizona is going to be in play? Does anybody believe that Arizona is going to be in play because of a large Hispanic vote and turnout?
2020?
No.
2020. It will be in play in 2020. Again, a precise prediction by J. Mart. Write that down. Anybody think it's going to be in?
So will other states like Georgia.
Right.
Yeah, and even Georgia and Texas eventually, incredibly enough, will be competitive. Okay, so that tells us we're basically focusing on 10 states, which means 40 states have decided. Oh, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. I'm terribly sorry.
Wisconsin.
I thought somebody mentioned Wisconsin.
I want your take. Why?
Go ahead.
Well, you did. You took it, so I wasn't. I think Wisconsin is a fascinating political experiment this cycle, and I think it is in play, and I think it's going to be interesting to watch. You know, the messages there, and also labor after obviously the recall. What I was actually going to focus on was something that Congressman Davis said, which was going back to Pennsylvania. I do not disagree with Tom Davis very much. But I think something he didn't mention is the senior vote in Pennsylvania, and I think that is what counteracts a lot of what you were talking about in terms of
It's
the
an old
youth,
state.
the youth vote not turning out, and there was a special election there last cycle that Democrats in Western Pennsylvania, the John Murtha seat, these are Clinton Democrats, that Democrats held. There was just a special election, a House special election in Arizona that Democrats won, and the seniors and the message about Medicare and the Ryan budget worked very, very well for them there, and I think that's what will win Pennsylvania for.
Go ahead and respond.
No, first of all, I think Medicare and Social Security are the best issues the Democrats have. I don't think this Bain Capital, I don't think that stuff goes anywhere at the end of the day. You take a look at the polling and the Pew poll that came in, but Medicare and Medicaid do, because seniors are the only group that McCain carried last time. And that goes into the Republican base, and you have, you can argue the Ryan budget. I would have voted for it, but you have to recognize at the end of the day that there's some vulnerability on that. And it has worked. It worked in the Hochul election in New York, most Republican district in New York. I think it worked in this Arizona election. But the Murtha seat looks like it may go back Republican this time. Right. And the cultural side of Western Pennsylvania, right now, the way this race is being played, Obama can talk rich and poor all he wants, but he's a non-starter with so many working class whites. They aren't even giving him a look. He can go Bain Capital till the cows go home. He can go outsourcing till the cow. They're not even looking at him. Right. Just like when Romney comes after taxing the rich, a lot of rich people in Hollywood and Silicon Valley aren't even giving him a look. These cultural alignments are pretty well defined. The lines are pretty hardened. We're talking about a race within the 40-yard lines. I think Medicare and Social Security are their best shots, but they must be saving them or whatever at this point. But I don't think this other stuff works.
I think that the cultural alignments point is right, and that's why I tend to side with Lauren. Pennsylvania, I think, is going to be hard for Romney. Yes, the sort of deer hunter voter in Western Pennsylvania, or as James Carville famously said, that Pennsylvania between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh is Alabama. So James Carville's words, not mine. It's true. But those kind of voters who are culturally Democrats, who voted for John Murtha for years, and still vote for Mark Ritz, are not going to vote for President Obama. The congressman is right. But how many of the voters in that state live in southeast Pennsylvania? I think it's about a third who live in that corner of the state. And yes, Romney can compete with those folks because he's not seen as a sort of Rick Perry type cultural outlier. But I think it's gotten so hard for Republicans since '88 to win those kind of voters. If you just look at the numbers going back to '88, Republicans really struggle in southeast Pennsylvania.
Well, I think, look, Bucks County, Montgomery, Delaware, those are the counties you're talking about at this point. We're going to do far better in these counties than we have in the past. One of the reasons is because the Obama economic message puts a bullseye on anybody making any money. That is going to have a toll. Last time it was very anti-Bush, it was anti-war, it was very cultural.
Cultural stuff still hurts you.
Well, sure it hurts. Sure it hurts. But I just think it does hurt. But Romney, again, a little more acceptable. He doesn't have the cowboy boots.
Right.
I think he is a more acceptable alternative.
Sure he is.
And I think it's going to be a competitive state.
All right, last
just
comment,
wanna point
Jill.
out-
We got some other things to cover here. Go ahead.
I just
Last
want to
comment.
point out that one thing Romney does have in Pennsylvania is Rick Santorum, and I don't think that that's helpful, particularly on these cultural issues.
All right, well, enough about Pennsylvania. Look, what they have just told you, what this expert panel has just told you is essentially 40 states are over. Maybe it's 39. I'm listening to all of you. Maybe you've added 4 states, maybe you've added 3. We can argue about it forever. But essentially, this election is about 10 states. 40 states are over. Doesn't matter that California has a skyrocketing unemployment rate, automatically Democratic. Doesn't matter that North and South Dakota are at 3% unemployment, automatically over. That's evidence of a polarized country. 40 states over. The whole race is about 10 states. Congratulations, you're one of them. Virginia's one of the 10. You'll see every single ad 172 times. And I want to ask a question about Virginia. We're here in Virginia.
Here we go.
All right, we got Virginians mainly on this panel, and we welcome the converts as well who are here. But the question is, Virginia, look at 2008. Virginia of the 50 states was the closest to President Obama's winning margin, 52.9. Virginia was 52.6. All right, higher than Ohio, 51.3, higher than Florida at 50.9. If President Obama loses Virginia at 5.6% unemployment, you can't get much better than that. If he loses Virginia, isn't the election over? How could he carry Ohio and Florida? It's done. Isn't Virginia the key state for President Obama?
Yeah, I think, and I'm not just saying that's because I'm a native, but I think it increasingly is. I mean, I think the Obama folks will say this, that it's increasingly the new bellwether. It's the new Ohio. Look, I think it's hard to see a path for President Obama to win the presidency if he doesn't carry Virginia. He can give back Indiana, he can give back North Carolina, but it's going to be really difficult for him to pull it off if he's not carrying Virginia. And that's why I think you might see him pull the ads out of Carolina after Labor Day. He's never going to stop advertising here, so you enjoy those ads because you're going to see them up until Election Day. Look, President Obama enjoys two things right now. He enjoys the fact that Virginia is not the state that it was 20 years ago, or certainly 40 years ago. It's a much more transient state. It's much more of a moderate state. It's always rewarded a sense of political moderation here, but I think that has moved a couple of ticks even to the left. It's always been a center-right state. I think it's now more of a pure centrist state, and I think President Obama benefits from that. The other thing that he's enjoying is there's a massive gender gap nationally, and that's what's helping the president right now in the Commonwealth, is the fact that women in Virginia, by I think 16 points was the last poll that I saw, support President Obama. Romney's got to find a way to make that up. I don't know what it's going to be, but he's got to find a way to make that up. And if he doesn't, then I think President Obama has a slight advantage. But to echo what Lauren was saying, there's no way President Obama will carry it by 7 points again. It's going to be a tight race this time.
Other comments about Virginia?
Well, it's the thing about Virginia, it's become more urban, and you've had a lot of inflow from other states and other countries. The difficulty for Republicans in Virginia is clearly Northern Virginia. Obama carried Northern Virginia by 233,000 votes last time. You can't make that up in the rest of the state. You've got to do something. And what makes Northern Virginia so peculiar, different than the Philadelphia suburbs or Ohio suburbs, is the fact that you have a large component that is dependent on government expenditures, government contractors and federal employees, and it's very multi-ethnic. Fairfax County is only like 54, 55% white today. And you've got to have outreach into the Koreans and the Vietnamese and the Indians and the Salvadorians and the very diverse population. In addition to that, Virginia's African-American vote, Obama maximizes that. He brings the turnouts up. And so the peculiarities of that make this a uniquely difficult state for Republicans against a Democrat like Barack Obama.
Good. All right. Now, Jill had her hand raised first. Let me go to her and then Christina.
I'll be quick. I was just going to say, it's a really interesting state because it's kind of previewing demographic changes that are happening in other states like Georgia and North Carolina. And it's interesting also because it's so divided, and so you have, at the same time you have more moderates and more immigrants. You also have this very culturally conservative contingent that's making life very difficult for the governor and may have deep-sixed his chances of getting on the Romney ticket because he's been on the hook for so many issues like abortion and ultrasounds. I mean, this fueling that gender gap that Jonathan was talking about. So. It's difficult for Romney in that respect. I don't know how he reaches out to women without alienating some of the conservatives who, have been at the forefront of those moves in the state legislature.
All right, let me get Christina's comment.
Yeah, I'll echo all of that, but just add a little bit in my own reporting. I was in Virginia Beach recently, and I had sort of been on the fence, thinking, well, maybe this will be really close. But I have changed my mind since I talked to some young people serving the military down there, probably about focus group of like 6 people, not official, and just asked every single one of them about the presidential race. What do you think of Barack Obama? They all hated him, and not one of them plans to vote. One of them was registered to vote. Nobody's asked them to register to vote. They went on and on talking about why they totally favor Republican policies and they don't care. And I thought, well, why isn't anyone reaching out to these people? They're like the target voter for Republicans. And that just made me think exactly what we were talking about with the different type of constituencies in Virginia that the president can probably win narrowly.
Tom, go ahead, last comment.
A huge piece of the Obama election component last time was his performance in college towns. Charlottesville, Radford used to be the Harrisonburg.
Right.
In fact, a Muslim Democrat beat Bob Goodlatte in Harrisonburg, that straight ticket college vote. That is not here this time. I'm just telling you, that vote, that part of the coalition is gone for them. They can try to rekindle it with this student loan argument they're making. That piece is gone, but there are still valuable ethnic components to that coalition, government components that make it difficult. For the record, I think this whole woman's thing is just way overblown in terms of the gender gap on that. Depends if you're talking about married women with kids versus single women. The polls are distinct depending on.
Please, we are civil in Virginia. We are civil.
I think they've made my case. I think I know where this crowd stays. But anyway.
Larry,
We used to be civil. Okay.
very fast. One last thing about the Commonwealth. I did a story about 2 months ago, digging in pretty deep into what's happening in Virginia, and it's not just a Northern Virginia story. A third of the state's votes are there. But what helped President Obama so much in 2008, and what has helped Democrats like Mark Warner and Tim Kaine, is the Northern Virginification of the rest of the state. It's the fact that it's an urban crescent story. And what's happened in places like Henrico County outside of Richmond and in places like Chesapeake and Norfolk and Virginia Beach is that you've got folks moving there from other states who don't have culturally strong views, who are politically moderate. They're just like the voters in places like Fairfax, Loudoun, and Prince William. And all those voters, I think, in the urban crescent are making this a much more of a moderate state.
Lauren, last comment on this subject. One more question for the panel, then we're going to your questions. Go ahead.
Two things. One, and I don't remember the statistic exactly, but something like after this last census, is it 60-some% of Virginia residents will live within 25 miles of either I-95 or I-64?
It's somewhere around there.
Something like
Yep.
that. That's exactly what Jonathan's talking about. Secondly, I think, it's going to be a close race in Virginia. What helps, the one advantage that no one has mentioned that Obama has is he had a turnout operation here 4 years ago. He had how many offices across the state? He already has that.
15 already.
That lived, continued in OFA, which then, got swallowed by the DNC. Mitt Romney, McCain had, nothing like that presence here, and so Romney's got to build his own. I think that's a pretty strategic advantage.
It is. But remember, Mitt Romney has Tom Davis. Now, I got to tell you, he's worth at least 3 offices all by himself. Look, last question for the panel. And remember, Tom was head of the NRCC, the National Republican Congressional Committee, successfully. No. I want to tell you this because there's been so much time. He was a great leaker to me, and I appreciated that. And he predicted, literally, I don't think you got a single race wrong in our talks. I mean, we went right up to election day, but and I just want to thank you for, I steal from the people who actually know it. It makes me look good. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, you're still doing the crystal ball, absolutely. But look, here's what I want from each panelist without a whole lot of commentary because we got to go to some questions. I want to know whether the Republicans will continue to control the House. Lauren, I'm going to start with you. Whether they'll continue to control the House and what the margin is. Will Democrats pick up a few seats? Will they lose a few seats? And then on the Senate, really, we all know it's close. So who's going to control? Who's going to control and want to give a margin? Terrific. Lauren?
Republicans control the House. Democrats pick up some seats. Probably, I would say, 10 or less. The Senate jump ball. If Obama wins, Democrats hold Virginia.
And if Romney wins, they get the Senate, probably, right?
And I would say, there are privately some people in Washington, some Republicans on Capitol Hill, who would much prefer to be in the majority with President Obama instead of President Romney.
Well, we'll have to have a question about that to explain. But let me go ahead to J. Mart.
Barring a Romney collapse, I think the Republicans are favored to keep the House, but they'll probably lose some seats in part because of reapportionment. I think it actually could be over 10. It just depends what happens in the top of the ticket. But I think every Republican you talk to on Capitol Hill is expecting to lose some seats. The Senate, I think, really does turn on the presidential. I think even if Obama does narrowly win, I think there's a chance that Republicans could take back the Senate because it is so close and because the math does favor them. Just look at the states that are in play. there's more Democrats playing defense than there are Republicans. So I think Republicans will have a shot to take back the Senate. But keep in mind, it's not going to be a sort of 60-40 proposition. I mean, it's going to be a 53-47 at best. So we're talking about it's still pretty narrowly divided Senate.
Jill.
I think the Democrats will gain about a dozen seats in the House, and the Republicans will still control the House. And I think Democrats probably will continue to control the Senate, but maybe lose a couple of seats, maybe 51.
51-49.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, it wouldn't be all that much different than the way it is now, because Republicans already can block anything they want. So I think they'll continue to have that.
Or even 50-50 with the new vice president breaking the tie. That's a possibility.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. Tom?
Or 50-49 with Angus King at
Yes.
UVA Law School.
UVA Law
graduate,
School.
Making
That's the way it should be.
Exactly. Patsy Ticer's nephew.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Really?
Yes.
The things you know, moderating a panel, the things you pick up, I mean, that's
Okay,
great.
So the House, look, the Republican...
Former state senator from Alexandria,
Or
sorry.
mayor of Alexandria as well.
Mayor of Alexandria, okay. We're really in the weeds now.
The Republicans' problem in the House is they so overperformed last time. But you have about a half dozen Democratic seats they pick up right off the bat this time because of retirements. Ross, Bohr, those seats are gone.
Right.
So it's really, when you take 25, it's really about 30, 35 seats that the Democrats have to pick up. And it's just insurmountable. And historically, it just doesn't happen in presidential re-elects. Presidential re-elects traditionally don't have long coattails, regime changes do. So I think they're likely to pick up some seats just because the Republicans so overperformed last time. But I don't think it will be appreciable. I think it's probably under 10. Senate is a jump ball situation. I think the better Romney does, it says things about turnout that I think will determine who controls the Senate. Republicans actually need 4 seats if they lose the presidency. Maine is 5 seats because they will lose that. And then Scott Brown is problematical in Massachusetts. So it's a pretty high bar at that point for taking it back if they lose some of these other seats. So I'd say the Senate is really 50-50. It is right on the bubble.
And that's right. Go ahead, Christina.
I totally agree with all of that. Lauren and I are exactly in agreement on the 10 seats that Democrats will pick up but not win control of the House. Right, net gain. As far as the Senate goes, one just point I'll make is that if Barack Obama wins, he's taking along with him Shelley Berkeley, who will flip that seat in Nevada, the Senate seat. So, and Scott Brown that's a fascinating race, right? Because here's someone who has to convince people to vote for Barack Obama and him on that ticket, and it's possible he can do it. But so I think it's definitely a jump ball. Most likely, the Democrats keep it.
Oh God, I'm not saying that in public. So he wanted me to get into the Hiawatha thing, and I'm not going to do it. Okay, he's such a devil, this Tom Davis. Look, I think they've summarized it beautifully. Democrats will gain anywhere from 8 to 15 seats. They need 35 to take control. Forget about it. Ain't gonna happen. Doesn't matter even if Obama wins. The Republicans will stay in control of the House. Senate, you tell me, 51-49 either way, 50-50. Maximum 52-48. Virginia could be the determining thing. And Virginia, don't you think it's very likely just to follow the presidential race? Although, I have met Romney-Cain voters. I've never met not one Obama-Allen voter. No, I just haven't. So if Romney squeaks by in Virginia, I think Cain will still win the Senate seat. But if Romney wins, say, by a couple points in Virginia, then I think Allen will win the Senate seat. So that's probably how it comes out, more or less. Don't hold us to this. It's June. And none of, by the way, our rule was none of this is on the record. I think that's obvious. Did we forget to say that? All of this is off the record. It's not off the record. We already goofed. Look, I want to go to a few questions. We got to keep it brief because we got a great panel coming. Start with you. I saw your hand first.
You put the entire discussion of Europe into some of these projections and ideas.
I'm going to have, for every question, you need to, the people in the other room. I didn't know there were people in the other room. Hello, people in the other room. Nice to see you. Not really. Okay.
So if people want to ask questions, please come to the mic because they're not going to ever hear.
This is Jeff Skelly from Harrisonburg. Okay? This guy, when you mentioned his city, he was happy. All right. Anyway, the question was, what's really going to happen in Europe? Summarize what's happening in Europe and how it affects the election. I'm actually going to ask for every question, only one answer from the panel. We'll never get through a lot of questions otherwise. You were, yeah. No, but he was in Italy. That's the last place you want to be to analyze Europe.
I saw a lot of Italian papers with big headlines on the front page that had the word Monti, who was the prime minister, in like 25-point font. I couldn't figure out anything else, but that was not.
That's very helpful, J. Mart. Thank you so much. It's very in depth.
Yeah, exactly. No, look, I think the news from Greece on Sunday was the best news the Obama White House has gotten in a period of months. The fact that the socialists didn't win, and the fact that the sort of centrist party is going to be able to have a majority in Parliament means that they're not pulling out of the Eurozone, which sort of stems off the collapse. But look, I think it's still anything can happen there.
It's bad, okay, for American economy. That's how I'd summarize it. It's bad, and that's a very nuanced, I think, view of what's happening in Europe. Yes, sir. Thank you for coming to the mic. We appreciate that.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me in the other room? Yes, very good. We've been talking about this election in the context of past elections, but this is really the first presidential election since the Citizens United decision. Could you possibly give your response in terms of how you think that that's going to impact the election?
All right, who's the biggest expert in campaign finance on this panel? Okay, Tom Davis raised his hand immediately.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, what it does is it changes from an Obama 2-to-1 spending advantage 4 years ago. I think Romney's going to have the advantage this time.
He'll outspend Obama. By what margin do you think?
Well,
a few hundred thousand, few million?
Cooks in the stew now at this point. There's so many independent players.
But spending doesn't decide the race.
No, it doesn't decide the race, but it is a factor. And when you go from a deficit to having expenditure, that does have an effect.
I'm gonna make a foolish prediction. I'll bet you Romney outspends Obama probably about 1.2 billion to about 800 million, something like that. I'm counting in the super PACs. You got to count in the super PACs in that total. But yeah, Sheldon Adelson alone may outspend Obama. It's entirely possible. The guy who funded Gingrich, remember? Yes, sir. Go ahead. Next question. You have to line up to get a question. Go ahead.
So we talk a lot about coattails. I'm wondering about state races affecting the presidential race. In any of these battleground states, could the Kaine-Allen race or some other race affect the turnout? Because you all talked about turnout in the presidential.
Good question. Good question. How do the undercard races affect turnout?
It affects it, but I think this is a base election, and the turnout flows from the top down. I think, just to follow up on the last thing, that the outside spending and the super PACs are going to have more of an effect on those down ballot races than the presidential race. I mean, coming in with millions can turn a Senate race, certainly a House race, much more so than adding another 5, 10, 20 million to the presidential race in a market that's already saturated.
Yeah, we had a good story.
Politico, that is.
Politico had a good story last weekend. A colleague of mine, Dave Catanese, about Sherrod Brown in Ohio, who's one of the last of the real populists in the U.S. Senate. And Sherrod Brown is running against the treasurer in Ohio, who is being kept afloat in large part right now by super PACs. Brown, to this point, has had $8.3 million spent against him in mid-June. So you just think about, from now until Election Day, what could happen in a place like Ohio, right? With that kind of money being spent. So Lauren's right. The big money will affect, I think, these Senate races in a huge way.
But Larry, I've got to say, it's not just the super PACs that we're talking about in Citizens United. It's McCain-Feingold, because McCain-Feingold limited what parties could raise. Parties have been a centering force in American politics for 200 years, and the naivete of the authors of that to think that you take money away from parties, that disappears. That money's going to show up somewhere, and it's gone out on the fringes.
And it's all back. Believe me, it's all back.
It's back and now unregulated.
Yes, ma'am.
Mine's more of a comment, and I need to ask where you got your information from, Mr. Davis. I'm the Virginia Now president. I have never seen so many people
step up and join now, plus all the independent women. And I need to thank you because you have educated women in Virginia so much. I need to thank the Republican Party because we needed money to educate women, and the young women are just coming out in droves now. They're so educated.
Get into an argument. I appreciate your comment. Let me just say, Tom Davis is a moderate Republican. He's not in the state legislature. You want to have an argument? The third floor over there with Governor McDonald, and he's in today. I think he's actually here for a few hours, so you can go up and see him. Let me get the next comment here.
Hi. My question has to do with your second question to the panel, and I'm wondering if anybody remembers how many states put gay marriage on the ballots in '04?
Well, I don't know the exact number, but I know that all those referenda passed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
There are a few. There are a handful of states that have gay marriage referendums. Maine is one of them. I think Minnesota, Maryland, Washington State. That's right. I think that's the extent of it this year.
no, in '04.
You're saying this year. I was applying your question to this year.
At least a dozen in '04. Okay, thank you.
Different
I'm not sure
time.
that affect the presidential race, just quite candidly.
You do not think it will affect the
I'm not
presidential?
sure it affected it even then. I mean, if you take a look at,
It certainly brought a whole lot of people out to the polls.
yeah.
Ohio, maybe.
Yeah, but you know
Ohio
what?
it affected, maybe.
You know what? I did a correlation of Allen's vote and the gay marriage vote, and
Yeah.
very little. I mean, the precinct in Fairfax that had the largest vote for the Allen lost, because a lot of this is ethnic. It's African American voters, and this is all over the lot. I could draw you out, but it does bring out some people that vote Republican, but it brings out a lot of Democrats too.
Yeah. It'll probably have less impact than you think. I think that's the summary of what we would be saying. Yes, ma'am.
Considering the emphasis on the cultural issues related to women, what impact do you think the women's vote will have on the national elections?
Get like a couple of the women to answer that question. That means Tom and J. Mart just relax, okay?
They're 52%, so I assume they have something to say about it.
Sometimes 53%. Okay.
Well, I think that those issues are going to have some impact, but I think that Mitt Romney has some tools in his arsenal, foremost his wife, Ann. I think the more that they get her out there, the more of an ambassador she is to women. And he himself has not had a terrible record on these things, and he, from the standpoint of women who are moderate. So, a lot depends on how he presents his record and how much he uses his wife.
And I'll just add to that it's not just a distinction about all women. It's, single women tend to favor Democrats, and certainly Barack Obama in a lot of these polls. It's the married women that are really that swing vote, and you're seeing the Romney campaign be very, very specific about targeting them. And my favorite topic is sort of the social networking in the campaign, and I use this example a lot. If you go to scrapbooking websites, you are likely to get an ad that says "Stand with Ann," and you click on it, and it takes you to the Romney campaign's site. I've now experimented this multiple times. I mean, they know what they're doing in this, and that's what they're trying to win over.
Lauren, last comment.
One of our reporters recently listened in on a focus group. There were two different places, and one of the places they were was here in Richmond. And this was a focus group with Walmart moms. And during the discussion, they didn't bring up all of what you've heard about, everything that happened here in the Capitol. They didn't talk about the war on women. They were talking about the economy, how they were going to pay for, their kids' clothes and school supplies. And I'll also just say that these same women in the focus group thought very highly of Michelle Obama. So I think to Jill's point, you're going to see Ann Romney and Michelle Obama both out on the campaign trail as surrogates a lot.
And no doubt at the end, people will wish they were running instead of their husbands, would be my guess. Now, let me ask you to join me in a vigorous round of applause for this terrific panel. They were great. I wish we had longer. They were terrific. I I want to ask them to stay here just for a moment. We're going to bring up the second panel, but we're going to do something while we're doing it, where we've got 5 fantastic veterans of presidential administrations who are Virginians who are going to participate in this panel. It's going to be chaired by my longtime friend Wyatt Andrews. Where is he? Is he here? He's in the other room? Wyatt and I went to, here he is. Come on in here, Wyatt.
I know a cue when I hear
That was a cue. You can tell he's a TV guy. We went to high school together. We went to the University of Virginia together. Are you available to be president if we need you? No. Oh, okay.
They beg.
They beg. No, they've been to a lot of people. Wyatt, you all know Wyatt. You've seen Wyatt. He gets, I think, more stories than any other correspondent on CBS News, or maybe I just pay more attention to you when you're on there. But he is a real hard news guy, and I'm proud that he is a University of Virginia graduate, and proud that he's my friend, and we appreciate his chairing this next panel. But Wyatt, while you're bringing your panel up, we want to show everybody. Give me 30 seconds introduction. A trailer for a new Center for Politics PBS show, which will be coming out in the fall. We have one a year on some governmental or political subject. And we're delighted to have this one. I see a couple of former John Warner aides in here. This was inspired by Senator Warner and encouraged by Senator Warner. It's entitled Out of Order. And the idea of it is to ask a basic question. What in the hell has happened to the U.S. Senate? And why doesn't it work anymore? And why can't we compromise anymore and make the system work? Whatever our perspectives or philosophies. And so you're going to like this. You're going to like this trailer, and you're going to enjoy the documentary, which we're all still working on. But I think you're really going to get something out of it. Can we show that trailer while we're arranging the next panel, please?
When is it airing?
It is airing in the fall. We don't have specific dates yet. It's called Out of Order. And goodness knows that describes the Senate. I guess we got to dim the lights here.
Resolving the problems that are confronting the nation. What has happened here is it really goes back to the money that has become the overriding and the driving factor in politics.
The slush of money that have come in, and the fact that you can now have unlimited amounts of dollars flow into campaigns without any even disclosure. The Citizens United Supreme Court case, which basically took off all the campaign finance restrictions. I gotta hope and pray that the Supreme Court realized they muffed on that one.
These so-called super PACs, they can provide enormous amounts of money to campaigns. Thus, the constant pressure to be prepared in order to counter what may be an onslaught of negative ads from out-of-state groups that have absolutely no connection to your state puts a lot of pressure on members to constantly fundraise.
When you are running for office, it's not uncommon that you have a fundraiser for breakfast, a fundraiser for lunch, and a fundraiser for dinner. And when you have spare time, you get on the phone and you call people for money. And when you are constantly campaigning, when you are always raising money, a lot of the money comes from more ideological sources, and all things political are higher up in your brain, and you're not thinking so much about how do I find common ground and solve the country's problems. It's all, where am I going to get the next dollar? It's an endless quest for political power through the use of means that render that power's effective use impossible.
I'm concerned that the enormity of this money is filtering down and lessening the enthusiasm of the man or the woman or the family that only maybe has $50 to contribute. Now, with these millions coming in from the super PACs, they say, what difference does my $50 make? Does my voice even count anymore? With the thunder of the advertisements coming across the airwaves. We're in for a real test in this country.
Candidates running for federal offices now have to raise so much money back home in order to run for an office. They have to sign off with so many interest groups before they get to Washington that once they're here, they can't compromise on anything. They can't move an inch to the left or an inch to the right. And when you have a legislative body that can't compromise, you have what we have now, a government that is in total gridlock.
In politics, there are no right answers, only a continuing flow of compromises among groups, resulting in a changing, cloudy, and ambiguous series of public decisions where appetite and ambition compete openly with knowledge and wisdom. That's all there is.
Well, I'm not going to be up here. He's better than I am. Where is he? Well, I don't know. We'll get him in a second. No, Wyatt is out there. Loretta. Thank you, you look great. I always imagine you in McDonald's. I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. Hey, Louise, how are you? Thank you so much for coming. We really do appreciate it. As long as you don't tell a TV person how to do sex. We have all the other ones? Hopefully. Well, we're looking forward to how to actually teach you. I taught one of yours, that was it. Yeah. I heard you, they say the best for last. That's what I'm told. Seriously.
Tell them it's true.
I hope you will come when you do come.
We'll go straight into it. No break.
Straight into it. Got it.
If you can wrap it up for the floor, that'd be great. It's up to you.
Got it.
It's all yours. Thank you.
What's your Twitter handle? At Wyatt CBS. At Wyatt CBS. At Wyatt CBS. Let me see if this is on. Testing. If this is on. Is this on? Testing. Testing. At Wyatt CBS. WYATT. I'm good. Is there a trick to turning this thing on?
Oh, you only tell them.
He told me you like him anyway, so he's working a basketball game this week. And I came up this week to hear him. I will tell him. I see.
should. Sounds like everybody's ready. I'm not sure if this mic is on. There we go. If everyone will take their seats. We've got an extremely interesting panel assembled of Virginians in the White House. And what that means is we have a lot of political appointees here to tell you a bunch of stories, and it's our job to figure out which ones are true. And we'll just hope that most of them are. What you're going to find, though, is a most interesting afternoon because every single member on this panel was a witness to history in some either large, important, or very small, in some cases, way. They were eyewitnesses to power as it was practiced or had to be practiced at the time. Sometimes it wasn't easy. What you're also going to find is that while there are going to be plenty of Virginians in the White House story, some of the decisions that they saw made weren't always made in the White House. Some of the best decisions sometimes are not made there. I've asked these panelists to give me permission to not go very deeply into their biographies for a couple of reasons. The first one is that for a lot of them, especially Mr. Marsh, who's been Assistant Secretary for about 18 different presidents, the resumes are just too long. And the other reason is that as they tell their stories, I think you'll appreciate that, you'll figure out what they were doing at the time. You don't need to hear the list. They will let you know themselves. And so let's get right to it. And we are going to start with John Marsh. I'm going to paint the historic picture for you, Mr. Marsh, because you will learn that when Mr. Marsh starts talking, history rolls out. So let me take you to the history of go back to the 1960s. Some of us will actually remember that. And this man was a Democratic congressman from the Winchester area of Virginia. He happened to become very good friends with a Republican congressman from Michigan named Gerald Ford. Now that's in the early 1960s. Fast forward a full decade to the middle of the 1970s, and I know I can just tell in the room, many people in this room, some won't, but most of the people in this room will remember the extraordinary period we went through in 1974. If you go back to Spiro Agnew, we had the first vice president resign in 1973. That was due to scandal, remember that? Several months later, Richard Nixon resigns because of Watergate. What you may not remember is that in December of 1973, the House Minority Leader, Gerald Ford, Jack Marsh's good friend, was House Minority Leader in December the year before, and in August of 1974 was President of the United States. You know, our Republican friends in the room will recognize that all you have to do to summon how unbelievable was this change in fortune is to imagine Nancy Pelosi, President of the United States, 9 months from now. That's who's the House Minority Leader now. So Gerald Ford, House Minority Leader, appointed Vice President, confirmed, and then with Nixon's resignation, President of the United States. You know, all Americans alive then, will remember how our heads were spinning. Anyway, here's where Jack Marsh comes in. Jack Marsh was made counselor to the President of the United States. And one of the first things Gerald Ford did was pardon Richard Nixon for all of his crimes. He wanted to do this in the name of national interest, but it made most Americans mad. What we don't recall, and Jack does, is that very quickly the House Judiciary Committee summoned President Ford to come explain himself to Congress. That's extraordinary. That's not just a high-stakes political moment for the country. It's a high-stakes constitutional moment. Because whatever president is in power, because of separation of powers, you don't want the President of the United States summoned to Capitol Hill like Larry Sabato summons us to Charlottesville or Richmond, wherever he wants to hold all this. You do not want the president summoned to the Hill like a child being sent to the principal's office. So President Ford had a decision to make, and he called Jack Marsh to the office. And Jack, he had a mission for you. Tell our audience what that was. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Wyatt. You didn't mention that really I'm just a country lawyer from over Strasburg, and I was had practiced law for 10 years, and suddenly the heart attack took Burr Harrison, who was a wonderful congressman, and I had the good fortune to succeed Burr Harrison, and this would be eventually in redistricting. The Charlottesville area would be a part of my congressional district, but he's talked about this transition. This was a very
Jack, excuse me 1 second. Can the audio folks turn up our mic volumes, please? One more time, and bring his mic closer. Thank you.
The period of the early 70s, 73, 74, were extremely turbulent and very, very difficult times for governing, and it was a very unfortunate situation in the White House. I had been named the Assistant Secretary of Defense by President Nixon. President Ford, can you hear?
Bring it way up.
President Nixon had named me Assistant Secretary of Defense, and what happened, President Ford would be elevated to the Vice Presidency under the 25th Amendment, the first President of the United States to ever be come up through the 25th Amendment, both for Vice President and President. And every Vice President is given a duty. Thank you, Bill. Every Vice President is given a duty. And with Lyndon Johnson, Mr. Kennedy gave him the space program that he was responsible for. Mr. Nixon, because of the problems in the White House associated with Watergate, assigned to President Ford, who was then minority leader when he was now Vice President, he gave Mr. Ford the issues that relate to defense and foreign policy. He did that to get it out of the White House because it was becoming so controversial. It was becoming so controversial that he couldn't continue to really oversee those programs in the White House. Ford wanted somebody on his staff that he knew, and I'd served on the Appropriations Committee in the House, as he had learned to know him. He called me over one day and said, "Jack, I want you to be my assistant for handling legislative affairs," which was his responsibility. And of course, I was very honored. I accepted it. Then you had the issue of all of the things that surrounded the Watergate. And Mr. Ford was deeply involved in it. He couldn't help it. He had to be. And then there was the Nixon resignation. And with the resignation of President Nixon, what was called a privileged revolution was sent in the House to the White House, which required the president to give them an answer. And the question was, were there ever any discussions on a pardon between you, Mr. Ford, and the Nixon White House? And the answer was, yes, there was. I was aware that had happened. Mr. Ford, of course, was. Mrs. Ford was aware of it, and Bob Hartman, his key staff member on the Hill, knew about it. We knew that offer had been made. President Ford rejected that. But after the pardon was made, and incidentally for you, the incident pardons, the pardon power of the President of the United States is different than the authorities that you find in government, in state governments. It's a very broad authority. You can read about it. Alexander talks about it in Federalist Paper number 74. But that pardon raised the question on the Hill, and the question was asked, did you ever have a discussion between Mr. Ford and representatives of the Nixon administration about a pardon? And the answer, unfortunately, Mr. Ford did not originate that. Somebody was sent to him to bring it up. Well, when the privilege resolution came in, I could tell immediately that he was of the view that the only way to answer it, you could never answer it in writing, was to go up on the Hill and tell the Congress what happened. That was strongly objected to in the White House staff because they didn't know about these other circumstances of conversations. They tried to draft an answer for him to go to the Hill. And I said, it was run by me, and it was run by him. I walked down, so I said, you can't sign that. He said, I know I can't, because they said in there that it had never occurred. And then an unusual thing happened, which to me is the premier memory that I have. We were in the Oval Office, the two of us. And he said, Jack, I want you to go up on the Hill. I want you to find Carl Albert, the Speaker of the House. And you tell Carl anything he wants to know about this. Tell him everything you know about it. And then say to him, Carl, give me your advice. What do you think I should do? Now, this is a president asking a principal Democratic member of the Congress what he should do. I went up there, I saw Mr. Albert. He looked at the papers I prepared for him and laid them aside. He said, Jack, look, Ford's greatest asset is his integrity, his honesty, and his decency. He says, that's been questioned a little bit because of his pardon thing. He said, tell him to come on up here. He's not going to be hurt. And I went back and I told the president, I stopped by to see Mike Mansfield, who was the majority leader. I said, Mike, what do you think? He didn't have much to say because he just was a quiet man, but he had a pipe in his mouth. He took the pipe out of his mouth, he looked at me, he said, Jack, tell him not to make it a habit. And so I gave the president those responses. But and he did go up on the Hill, and we did a lot of preparation before that happened. But
Jack, why was the White House staff opposed?
Pardon?
Why was the White House staff opposed his appearance?
Because the White House staff did not know that the Nixon White House had been over and talked to Mr. Ford about a pardon. In fairness to them, they wanted to just answer it as a routine inquiry from the Hill. As the privilege resolution, we had had privilege resolutions before. They were used during the Vietnam War, and most of them were directed to the Department of Defense. And the privilege resolution, the president can take the resolution and he can farm it out to the cabinet officer or senior executive assistant who handle that action, and they can answer it for the president. But you could not do that with the pardon, because there's only one person in the United States under the Constitution, Wyatt, that can raise the issue and address it and offer and make a pardon. They did not know that. So when they still didn't want him to go, I would tell you, it was a high-risk thing. I remember just as we drove up to Capitol Hill, he and I had been working on it for a couple of weeks getting ready, and I felt very good about it because I knew Ford was really good on the Hill. He really had a lot of friends on the Hill. And as we were driving up there in the last 100 yards, we were pulling up to the committee hearing building, and I thought to myself, Jack, what if this thing doesn't go well? And that was going to be the end of his presidency. But he did a magnificent job, and he cleared the air, and it helped that he did it. But that was President Ford. He's very frank, very sincere man, and his friends on the Democratic aisle were vast, that he could reach across the aisle in the House or the Senate, and they would come to him. They'd give him all kinds of hard times on the floor of the House. I saw him one time. It was picked up at Washington Post. Terrible speech that Tip O'Neill made about him, and just giving him down the country. And I walked in and he said, yeah, before I came in, he said, I've already seen it, Jack. I've already seen it. So he said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get Tip on the phone. He picked up the phone and told the operator to get him the majority leader of the House, Tip O'Neill. When he got Tip on the phone, he said, Tip, I've been reading this Washington Post article and all these terrible things you're saying about me. Now, I want you to know, if you don't stop, I'm going to go up to Boston and tell them what a lousy congressman they got. So.
That's a story from the presidency of President Ford. Let's fast forward now 37 years to the Oval Office of Barack Obama. Early in 2011, the issue then was the issue now. The president needed more ideas on jobs. He didn't think he was getting enough ideas from the staff, and so he had one man in the Oval Office waving his arms saying two words, Mr. President, wireless broadband. Anish Chopra had been Virginia's Secretary of Technology, but President Obama brought him from Richmond to Washington to become America's first Chief Technology Officer. There have only been two. President Obama invented the office, and Anish was the first. So Mr. Chopra, at some point, the president calls, right, and says, Anish, you're on. What's the deal with wireless broadband?
Well, this is, it was actually my favorite moment serving the president. I reported directly to the president as an assistant, but I served on the National Economic Council and the Domestic Policy Council. And in the White House, it's the National Economic Council that vets ideas for the State of the Union to think about how we can grow the economy. And I had made my pitch early in this cycle that we needed to look at mobile broadband. Now, most of you who know the internet, America dominated the first wave of economic growth on the internet. We had dial-up, and AOL was a Virginia company. A second wave on the internet happened because we connected people to faster pipes, and you saw companies like Google and Facebook and Yahoo born as the next wave of economic growth. And the indicators are that the third wave of economic growth will come from mobile broadband. You may have seen Apple announce that they've given $5 billion in checks to app developers who've created mobile broadband products just on the Apple Store alone. So the president had asked his team for ideas on infrastructure. How are we going to get the country moving again? You recall his State of the Union was called Winning the Future in 2011. But it's December, and we had just suffered losses in the midterm. There had been a healthy debate about investments in the future and budget or deficit reduction. And that tension played out in the ideas that were presented inside in this case, it was the Roosevelt Room, not the West Wing, but in the Roosevelt Room. And the president said, I want bolder ideas that can balance the budget challenges of our time. So I get a call from the Chief of Staff's office saying, you're up. Your chance to make your pitch to the president. We're now, weeks away, as you know from the State of the Union process. This should have been long done. We're now at the very end. And president turns and said, okay, Anish, let's hear what you have to say. And I basically said this. Imagine a policy idea that connects 98% of the American people to the next platform for economic growth, that makes good on a promise after 9/11 that our firefighters and police officers and EMS professionals should have access to the same tools that we use in our personal lives. They don't do this today. They don't have interoperable communications today. And 3, an idea that actually lowers the deficit, not adds to it. And that's when he turned and said, I'm in. And that turned into the National Wireless Initiative. President unveiled it in the State of the Union. We went to work. I called this the story of how Washington works. I don't think any of you have ever heard of it. Any of you, raise your hand. Have you heard of the National Wireless Initiative? 1, 2. So this is a classic example of Washington working. So the president, there's 2 Washingtons. There's the stuff on all the cable news, which is like the mean, everybody hates each other, it's bad, it's divisive, it's terrible. And then there's like cool, awesome Washington that I loved working in every day.
You weren't saying CBS?
Right.
Not cable? Not cable.
That's right. But Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, a Republican from Texas, says, I'm in. Senator Jay Rockefeller, our neighboring state, West Virginia, I'm in. The 2 of them ranking members of the Senate Commerce Committee. And they went to work month after month. Tireless negotiations, experts, very technical stuff. This is really boring technical stuff. But they worked together. And I remember they had a markup hearing in June, and they had the votes, and they brought every major constituency compromised. The super high-tech crowd, the carriers, the unions, all kinds of folks came together. And a majority of Republicans and a majority of Democrats voted for that wireless initiative. Now it's sat in the Commerce Committee, and it got all mucked around with all the mess. But the president, not even a year later, gets to sign the payroll tax cut extension. And in that vehicle, Congress decides to include the National Wireless Initiative because it had been built bipartisan. And he signs it into law 1 year and 1 month after announcing it to the country in the State of the Union. And it will have a dramatic effect. My hope is that we'll start to see not only investments in capital flow, but applications and startups coming up, taking advantage of the next wave of economic growth. It's an exciting opportunity, but one that was not written about once. I'll make one final observation about it because it was a funny story. I actually flew on Air Force One when the president flew to Marquette, Michigan to announce this initiative. It was in February. Now, Marquette, Michigan is in the Upper Peninsula. They have more snow days than sun days, basically. And the reason why this was relevant is because kids don't go to school on snow days. And they had used mobile broadband in Marquette. So kids could stay essentially in their neighboring school without having to go up the hill. There was a big hill. And they were able to stay connected in their schools, not miss a beat. And so the president chose to make Marquette the place where he would announce this major infrastructure initiative. It was 2 weeks after the State of the Union. It was a big deal. We're going to make a big message of the day around this. But it was the day that Hosni Mubarak had his issues in Egypt. So it never got reported.
On your way into the Roosevelt room, did you think this is a tough sell? Did you think game on?
No, I actually thought, let's just game on. I said, they've given me the chance. The president had 2 rounds of his economic ideas that he'd rejected. So I was part of the 3rd round. And so it was clearly the end. You had to make a decision between then and the State of the Union to vet, all this stuff. And I knew that this had a chance. And it was something that, one more observation, maybe 2 weeks earlier to this, I was one of the staff members in the Blair House. The Blair House is a place famously known for dignitaries, heads of state. But the president used the Blair House to invite about 25 CEOs, some of the biggest companies in America, technology and non-technology, Pepsi, Cisco, GE, Comcast. And this 5-hour meeting, the president sat for 5 hours. And in the course of that conversation, there was clear consensus. Mobile broadband was an area of growth. So I knew there had been already some setup for this because of that conversation, and this was a chance to make it.
Real briefly, help us in one more area. What is the connection between wireless, as opposed to wired broadband, wireless broadband, and jobs?
So the most powerful piece about mobile broadband is it knows where you are and makes it information relevant. President Reagan made a very important decision in his administration to open up government data called the GPS system. The GPS system today represents a $90 billion market because knowing where you are has relevance for advertising. I could walk up and down any of the streets here in Richmond and someone could message to me if I permissioned it, hey, get $1 off the pizza if you come into the store. And I could take advantage of that and participate in the economy on Main Street. So just this positioning is powerful. But the other trend is increasingly these devices have more computing power than what we use to get to the moon. So what's happening is we can now calculate in ways you could never imagine